Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 379. And today we're back for another Rut Fresh Radio episode in which we are getting reports from across the country on the latest deer activity, how current conditions are impacting things, and the tactics that are going to help you right now during the middle of October, the quote-unquote dreaded October lull. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Onyx. We're back here for another Rut Fresh Radio episode in which Spencer and I are going to be setting us up to hear from a handful of different hunters from across the country. They're going to get us the very most recent intel on what deer are doing right now. So what have they been seeing over the last week? What kind of conditions are impacting deer behavior? What are the tactics that are working right now? And what should we expect over the next 7 days? Can we predict what kind of movement we're going to see? Should we be thinking about different tactics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? That's the game plan. This episode, the day it comes out, if you're listening to this on the day it comes out, it's October 14th. We are just about in the dead center of October. Spencer, what are your thoughts out the gate on that dead center of October time period?
Well, referring to Rut Fresh Radio, and I say this every year, but these are my favorite episodes of the podcast, from like that October 10th to that October like early 20s episodes. These are my favorite episodes because I think there's so much to learn, and there's so many different ways that hunters across the country kind of approach what we consider to be the October lull. And you always hear it in these episodes, how you get this like super wide range of numbers thrown out. Like we know, Mark, when we get to, like the November 4th episode, everyone's going to say that movement is an 8 or a 9 or a 10. But right now you get this super wide gulf of numbers where someone might say a 1 and someone might say it's an 8. And I think that just speaks to how middle October and what most hunters would refer to as the October lull is quite an enigma. So while it might not be the best hunting right now, these are my favorite episodes of the year for that reason.
Yeah. Another big thing is that whether you rate it as a 1 or an 8 might also depend, more so than at any other time of year, on what kind of hunter you are. So are you the kind of hunter that likes to play it safe and hunt the edges? Or are you really aggressive and pushing into core areas and into security cover? If you're a conservative edge hunter, this is a time of year that you're probably going to think things are pretty darn slow in a lot of cases. If you're really aggressive and you're pushing the envelope and going in deep, you might have some 8 out of 10 nights this time of year. If you're looking at a Mark Drury at this time of year, he's going to be telling you it's a 2 or a 3 on a food plot edge. If you're talking to Aaron Warburton from the hunting public who's pushing into the middle of the buck nest right now, he's going to tell you, man, there's big bucks. I'm seeing big bucks every day. So this time period, I think, has, as we've talked about, generically been labeled the October lull. I like to call it the October shift because it's simply a big change in deer behavior and a big change in habitat and conditions, which just requires a change in our hunting. And you can make that change with them if you're willing to be aggressive. If you don't want to be aggressive for certain reasons, then you're just going to have to live with a slightly slower time period in those conservative stands. I guess, Spencer, you tell me if you think this is necessary or not, because we've talked about this year after year after year. So there might be people listening who know this stuff, but at the same time, there could be new hunters. Is it worth me walking through the high level? This is what the October shift is. This is why I think it happens. Here's 2 things to think about. Do you think we should still cover that?
Absolutely, because I think there's like 2 very popular ways of thinking about this. One of them is that the lull is real and bucks are nocturnal, and they're damn near impossible to kill for a few week stretch. So I think that's one way of thinking about it. And the other way of sort of thinking about it is that, like you said, there is a shift, but hunters may not look at that shift beyond just what the food source is. So I think it is like still something that's really relevant to cover again this fall, Mark.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I'll run us through like the quick, as you pointed out the other day when you were hosting the show by yourself, you said here's the Cliff Notes version, which is something that Mark says a lot, apparently. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, but you can also go, and there's actually 2 articles I wrote on this in quite a bit of detail over on the Meat Eater website. I wrote one article last year called "The October Lull is Real," and then I wrote an article this year that I think we simply called "How to Kill a Buck in October." And in both of these, I addressed the October shift. Here's the high-level bit. At this time of year, many hunters experience a decline in visible deer sightings because of these changes. Number one, there is a change in food sources across most places, right? We're seeing certain crops that are defoliating, like soybeans dried down completely by now, and some are being harvested. You've got corn that's drying down now, so deer that maybe were feeding on soybeans are shifting to corn, or whatever the crop is in your area. There's changes going on. Some drying down, some being harvested. There's leaves falling down, so cover is changing across most parts of the country. And then you also have hunting pressure increasing significantly across the country. So all of those things are changing the whitetails world. So because of that, whitetails are going to adjust. So you might have seen deer, let's say your hunting season didn't open until October 1st. Maybe the week before, September 24th, 25th, you saw a big mature buck out in a soybean field that still had a few green leaves here and there, and he was out there feeding in daylight. Now that buck might not want to do that at all on October 15th because the beans are gone. There's been hunters running around spooking him, and that little thick grassy area that was next to the bean field a couple weeks ago is barren. There's no tree cover now, maybe we'll say, hypothetically. So to overgeneralize, these deer are on new food sources. They're readjusting to find spots that are better cover-wise, even without leaf cover, and they're typically spending more time in that security cover during daylight because they don't want to move as far away from their bedrooms with hunters around that they now are aware of. So you've got one of 2 options I see. And this is to oversimplify. There's always nuance. Everyone's got a different situation, but I would put 2 general schools of thought to consider for how to hunt this time period. If you know your property really well, if you're experienced, if you know where these bucks live, whether that be through observations or trail cameras, or you've hunted here a lot and you know, man, there's always a big buck in these couple bedding areas in October. If you feel really confident in that, or if you have 17 different scouted out public land locations that you're really confident with, and if one doesn't work, you can move on to the next, now is still a time to get on a nice buck if you're willing to be aggressive and push in close to their bedding areas. This is the Dan Infalt approach, or the Andre DeQuisto approach, where you push into that thick stuff, you go get those bucks, no matter what time of year it is. That would be one approach. And it's kind of a swing for the fences approach, because by doing this at this time of year, there is the high risk that you could push in close and spook that deer or educate that deer and never even see him. So if you only hunt a little tiny property, or if you have not done this stuff before and you don't know your areas, or you're not confident as a hunter yet because you're relatively inexperienced, that might not be the best thing to do at this time of year. There's better, slightly more conducive to new hunter or to small property hunting coming up later. So if you play it safe now and wait till that better stuff comes in late October or November, you could keep these deer uneducated and around for that better stuff. So those are the two schools of thought. If you're in the less experienced or less opportunity, small property, if you're in that camp, now's a good time to, hunt some public land so you don't mess up your little property. Now's a good time to be conservative and sit, observation stands that are on the edges. If you still want to hunt, you just watch from afar and learn, but don't go pushing into the good stuff. Or this maybe is a time to work on your honey-do list and get some work done around the house or whatever. Now might be a time to do that. So it just depends on where you feel you are based on those two sets of circumstances I described. Now, there are these different varying factors that can change all that, such as if you happen to see a mature buck or whatever you're after. If you see the kind of deer you're after moving in daylight, go get him. If there's a front pushing through, that can change things. At least I believe so. That can change things a little bit. So there's some nuance here, but that is my Cliff Notes version of what this time period is all about, Spencer. What am I missing? Is there anything important I'm missing there? And or is there anything that our guests that you've talked to already, is there anything they brought up that we need to add to this as a foundation?
Well, it seems like something that can, reverse the October lull, as we talked about a few episodes ago, and you just touched on there, is when you get a front to move through. It seems like for most of the country, there is a cold front coming through between like Wednesday and Saturday of this week, so the 14th and the 17th. Between there, a lot of the country is going to have some cold front where you're looking at like a 40 to 50 degree swing between the high on one day and the low on the next day. And as we talked about on the September 30th episode, Mark, this is kind of like, maybe the last catalyst that we get to make deer movement go up and get a mature buck moving when he wouldn't be otherwise until we get to November. So I think that's relevant, and it's a reason that all of our guests this week are really optimistic. And who we talked to is Caleb Combs from Stewart Ranch Outfitters in Oklahoma, Bo Martonic from the East Meets West Hunt podcast in Pennsylvania, Parker McDonald in Alabama from Southern Ground Hunting, and then Alex Gilstrom in Illinois from Whitetail Properties.
Nice. Sounds like a good slate. I'll tell you on my end, just to add a little bit of personal update off of what I just described as my generic October shift perspective. I used to find myself in the latter camp. So I used to approach the October lull as I was really conservative. I would leave my best spots alone completely. I wouldn't even go into the property. I would usually hunt like October 1st and 2nd, and I wouldn't come back again to almost November. And maybe that was the right thing to do at that time. But, the more experienced and confident I've become with what I'm doing, and the more people we talk to who are, proving that the October lull or October shift or whatever you want to call it, it doesn't have to be a bad time to hunt. I'm gaining more and more confidence in taking some swings at that time. So with this front, this is the kind of thing that I think, I'm willing to do something that 6 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, I wouldn't have done. I might take a swing on an October 5th or 16th hunt because of that temperature. And because, checking trail cameras in some spots, I'm seeing that I do have bucks that are in the area still, that are moving on the edge of daylight. I even had my number one buck, Spencer Tran. He was moving in daylight after the hunting season opened on this property, and I was over on the back 40 hunting with my dad trying to get him a buck, and Tran was walking around in daylight on the other farm. So that tells me that at least up to that point he hadn't been boogered. He was still feeling comfortable, and I know the general zone, or one of a couple general zones where he spends a lot of time, and I think where he beds. So with this front coming in, I'm thinking I might take another crack at him. So I'm interested to see what everybody else says. But as of now, I am cautiously excited, Spencer.
I dig it. And like you said, so much of your outlook on this time of year has to do with what properties you have available, what your style of hunting is, what kind of time you have available, all those sort of factors. And again, that's why I love these middle of October episodes. But I think that's enough from us this week. Let's get to our guests.
Perfect.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Parker McDonald in Alabama from the Southern Ground Hunting. Now, Parker, in Alabama, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
Man, I would probably say about as low as I've ever seen it. I would say probably a 2 or 3, at least in the areas where I'm hunting at right now. It kind of seems like, it's hard to really even find a lot of deer right now because just things are so much different than they usually are every other year. And especially bucks, man. I'm not seeing even a whole lot of tracks in some of the main areas that I hunt. Not even finding a whole lot of buck tracks or sign or anything like that. And so it's been pretty slow. The only reason I give it as high as a 3 is because there have been a couple of friends that I know who have killed bucks, and seen some, but for me, it's been pretty low, about as low as I've ever seen it.
Now, this is one of the earliest openers that Alabama has ever had. So what has that meant for hunters in your state this year?
Well, so the state of Alabama usually is about mid-October, so sometime around October 15th. And the majority of the state is still following that those season dates, but there's actually like 3 different areas pretty much spread across the state this year that opened up on October 1st. And as far as I know, that's the earliest anybody's ever been able to legally hunt in Alabama. So there's a lot of things are just incredibly different this year versus last year. And that is like in the areas that I hunt, a lot of the acorns hadn't even started dropping yet when the season opened. And so big woods areas like I hunt, just real big woods, very unforgiving terrain, hardly any crops, especially on the public that I hunt. You're not going to be able to key in on like really consistent concentrated food sources. And so what I'm hearing from a ton of people, if you can find a hot feed tree, like just one of the few oaks that have dropped, if you can find that, then you can find deer. But otherwise, the deer are pretty much sticking with just a lot of the natural browse, and they're not really coming out of the thick stuff. And that's what I've seen. I've been lucky enough in the last 2 weeks to kill a couple of does. And most of that is because I found a tree that was dropping acorns early. And I think within the next, couple weeks, you're going to start seeing where a lot of the white oaks have already started dropping, and you're going to start seeing a lot more activity. But for hunters, I'm hearing the same thing from most people, unless you have private land to hunt where you've got some type of food plot or ag field or something like that, which is, pretty typical for a lot of people hunting early season openers. You key in on those crops and those food sources like that. And so if you don't have that, it's been extremely tough.
Besides big ag and acorns, are there any other food sources that hunters in the big woods in the South can focus on for the month of October?
Occasionally you can find things like persimmons or muscadines or something like that. A lot of on private land, a lot of guys are able to hunt over, bait, hunt over corn and things like that. But as far as natural, I really struggle to say that there's anything better than a hot feed tree. A good area with some good acorns dropping. That's about as good as I've been able to find out here.
I know you do a lot of hunts where you do water access on your kayak. So how does that change, or how is that different in October than it is, say, in November or December when you're coming into those pieces of public land through water?
It's actually pretty different than normal. So I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and we were trying to figure out why all of the sign that I'm seeing, most of the tracks, most of the really heavy crossings that I'm finding are right up against the water. A lot of these deer are just hanging out right on the water. And the thing that we figured out and started trying to put the pieces together is that a lot of the area around that water, especially the slopes kind of that don't really have any trees blocking them because the water is there. And so the sunlight is hitting the bottom, and you're getting a lot of that undergrowth, which also includes a lot of natural browse. And so a lot of these deer, because the acorns hadn't dropped yet, even persimmons and things like that, just a lot of the food sources that you tend to key in on early season in Alabama, because those things haven't become available yet, these deer are sticking close to the water because a lot of that browse is right there close to the water. And so it's made things a little more difficult. A lot of the areas that I typically would hunt in the early season, the sign has not started to open up. Even like just not even buck sign, but just deer sign in general. I'm not seeing it like I normally do. And I think it has a lot to do with those deer just sticking right there close to the water, which makes things a little more difficult on your access, to be honest with you. If you're using water access, a lot of the deer are really close by right when you get out of the boat. So you have to be pretty stealthy. You have to be pretty knowledgeable about your area. Otherwise, you could go in there and potentially ruin a good area because you went in too early and too aggressive.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Alabama?
I think this coming weekend, obviously it's the statewide over the ground, but I killed a doe on Sunday. We're recording this right now on a Tuesday, and I killed a doe 2 days ago, and that was the first area that I started seeing that acorn crop really, really start to be good. I mean, and they were munching on them hardcore, and there was a lot of tracks, it just looked like turkey scratch. And so I think as the week progresses this week, getting closer to that statewide opener, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more buck activity. And also I think too, pressure really does tend to get deer on their feet more, at least in the areas that I hunt. I tend to see more deer when there's a little more pressure on them. They're not just hanging out, in their bedding areas and not moving around a lot. They're having to get away from a lot of the pressure. So I think as the pressure increases, you're going to see a lot more deer get on their feet, especially on these big public pieces. But when the food sources become available and a lot of the deer are in the areas that you're used to them being in, I think that's going to cause a lot more bucks to be seen and killed this week. So I would say within the next week, it's probably going to go up to about a 6 or a 7.
All right, Parker, great info. I like your optimism. Good luck, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Spencer.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Alex Gilstrom from Whitetail Properties in Illinois. Now, Alex, in Illinois, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would have to give it I would say probably up to this point, to this week, I would probably give it about a 6, at least in my specific region here in Western Illinois. Yeah, I think a lot of it so far has got to do with, it's been warm. We've had warm temps, varying wind conditions, and a lot of it is, I think I'm not alone in seeing this, is a lot of it has to do with the acorn crop. So, I primarily hunt exclusively public land most of my season, if not all my season. So, variables are working against me a little bit. I don't do anything with food plots. It's not anything like guys I've been talking to, at least in this area, a lot of good activity on good clover plots or secluded food plots that are close to like oaks or certain ridges or things like that. Well, for me, it's all based around bedding in those oak ridges because the food isn't really there. So that's kind of been the story of the season so far is a lot of warm temperatures, which has slowed some movement, made the movement that I have seen tend to be like right at either last light or right at first light, a couple mornings that I've hunted. And they seem to be a little dispersed right now because at least in my exact area for the oaks, it seems to be pretty decent across the board, but there's definitely been hot spots where I've found concentrations of deer in certain areas or portions of different portions of public land that I've found. So it seems to have them a little bit scattered out. It always seems like in a good oak year, it makes the early season tough because the deer they're in the cover, they stay secluded, they're not moving as far from bedding typically, and they can kind of scatter. So that seems to at least be the case up to this point.
How does the 2020 acorn crop compare to recent years in Illinois?
There was a better crop for acorns definitely this year than last year. I would probably say it's pretty close to 2018. And kind of it's I guess it's remained fairly consistent with that every other year pattern. And again, it depends so much on the species of the oak and kind of rainfall and moisture levels and things like that in the soil. So, but I would say, in a nutshell, that's kind of how I would stack it up. Is it's definitely heavier than last year, probably similar to what it was in 2018, and kind of seeing it evolve a little bit further. Which conversely, it's made sign a little bit tougher to find. It's made the deer a little bit tougher to find, but I think, with just in the last 5 days or so, the last week, finally starting to see more of that ground sign, the scrapes open up and more rubbing activity and things like that. But prior to the last week, it's been pretty difficult to find even the sign to this point.
How much does seeing recent sign play into your decision-making hunting that public land in the Midwest in October?
It's everything for me. Right now, it's especially for early October, is I really try not to rely on historic experiences. Now, of course, I factor that into the conditions and to the locations and things like that. But just because I had a good encounter, even had success in a specific area, it's like I'm a firm believer that you have to scout hunt. You've got to scout twice as much as you hunt and go to the deer. I don't wait for the deer to come to me. That's my personal kind of philosophy and strategy. So it's been a struggle, but it's really been great to see that kind of come to fruition, to see the sign kind of happening now and really starting to pop up a little bit more. And as you'd expect in a decent acorn crop area or year, it's really happening on those transition lines from thick cover into those oak flats, or it's actually on the oak flats. Now, a lot of it seems to be nighttime activity. So it's trying to factor in and kind of understand where that movement's happening, when it's happening, how to capitalize on it. But yeah, for me, understanding the sign, seeing where it pops up, and trying to factor in how to kind of set up my game plan around it is huge. And for me, the weather's affected that a lot. So we haven't had a lot of great cold fronts. We've had some. There's actually another really good one coming at the end of this week. But with this warmer weather, it's brought higher winds. So I've tried to use that to my advantage too, with these higher wind speeds and a little bit warmer weather, to push back a little bit further than maybe I normally would this time of year, but I can do so with kind of a concealed access. So access is huge, especially when you're trying to navigate around these different like isolated oak flats and things like that, to where the deer are kind of feeding, is trying to get in and out as clean as possible. And the higher wind speeds, even though it's kind of accompanied by warmer weather, I've used that to my advantage to be able to kind of time my attacks, if you will, to get in a little bit tighter on these deer to try to get more daylight movement. And then the higher wind speeds have been able to help me do that.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Illinois?
I'm hoping for an 8. I'm going to be optimistic and kind of predict an 8. We've got another this Thursday and Friday here. There's going to be another really good cold front coming in. It doesn't look like precipitation's accompanying it, but it's going to be another like windy day, I think, on Wednesday, and then kind of transition into bringing those on the backside of that front, the lower temps. So it should be really good Thursday and Friday for some colder temperatures. I'm hoping for earlier movement in the evenings, a little bit later movement in the mornings. And my concentration is going to be those secluded, kind of what I call is like primary scrape areas. So the scrapes and the sign that I'm seeing back in the cover, more like transitional between leaving like really thick bedding areas, even on the edges of some, and really focusing on those areas and trying to see determine which are the freshest, which are the most active, and capitalize. And doubling up on that as it gets a little bit closer into the pre-rut at the end, toward the end of the month, those becoming more active, the weather helping that with the cold front. And so I'm shooting for an 8 here at the end of the week.
Great info, Alex. Good luck with the rest of your season, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Spencer. As always, appreciate it, man.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Caleb Combs from Stewart Ranch Outfitters in Oklahoma. Now, Caleb, in Oklahoma, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
1 lately. I'm not one to be pessimistic, but it has not been good. Temperatures have been unusually high, and sightings are low, and trail cameras have basically been dead. So it has not been good.
You mentioned your trail cameras there. Where are you running a lot of your cams in mid to late October?
in mid-October, early October, I start transitioning towards scrapes. Those are just my favorite place to run cameras. So I run scrapes pretty much all year. I still have some on food sources, some on some acorn trees that have been hit really good lately. But for the most part, I'm always on scrapes, even on the edges of food plots. Scrapes everywhere.
What food sources are you most keyed in on this time of year?
Food plots haven't really started going yet. So if I'm near agriculture, I'm usually still on that. So it'd still be beans right now or alfalfa, but acorns a lot of the time as well. It doesn't seem like it's going to. Last year was the most acorns I've ever seen. And this year seems like it came back down to actually huntable, mostly red oaks where I'm hunting. Not a lot of white oaks producing. So I'll be on the creek bottoms, actually, the creek edges, hunting red oaks.
Is there a time of year that those food plots are going to get better for you?
Ideally, it's going to rain. It hasn't for the last week and a half. They started out good. We usually plant ours trying to get our food plots going mid-October. So we're not shooting for opening. We're shooting for mid-October for them to really turn around and everything start germinating, popping out. So if it rains soon, then we should be all right. They're probably hitting them now, but I won't start hunting food plots real hard till mid-October when everybody's seeking.
Are you seeing any sign making yet in Oklahoma?
Yeah, scrapes have been going. I've been getting real good pictures on scrapes since early October. But like I said earlier, I run a lot of cameras on scrapes, so I'm usually pretty honed in on which scrapes are community scrapes or the ones that get hit, the licking branches that get hit a lot of the season, like the majority of the season. But they're making new ones. There are some scrapes that I have made that have been going well, but I'm seeing scrapes pop up around my scrape, so that they're really getting going.
So when you say that movement has been really poor lately, are you just saying that they're mostly moving at night, or you're just finding that the deer have quite a small range right now?
Small range. I'm never a big believer that they just move at night, just because, I realize they go further, but if you're on top of them, if you know where the bedding area is, if you've done your research, you can usually get in there. Might be the last 10 minutes or whatever, but you can get close and you can get on deer during daylight hours. So it's just been dead as far as they aren't moving. They're not hitting scrapes because it's been so hot. So even the scrapes they had started, they quit hitting the last week or so. But it'll turn back around Thursday.
If you got a cold front in this next week and you're feeling optimistic, what would that setup look like?
I don't know yet because I haven't checked on my trail cameras, but I will probably be on scrapes. I don't think it's food plot time. If I can find a spot that they're hitting the acorns that's close enough to bedding, it'll all depend on what my cameras tell me. I'll pull them. It's about to turn around. The week's about to be fantastic. So I would say Thursday, Friday in Oklahoma, the weekend, and then from what I saw in the forecast, everything after that. But it's one of my favorite times to go. So acorns and scrapes, if you're not running a bunch of cameras, whatever scrapes probably will start getting hit again Thursday or Friday.
What makes mid-October one of your favorite times to hunt?
I have OCD, or not like a real bad, like weird version, but I like things organized. I like knowing what I'm getting into. I like information. So I don't like November. I don't like hardcore rut when they're stuck with does, when they're pulling them off, when they're just trying to get away from everybody. So October, December are my favorite because deer are more predictable, but they're moving more during daylight hours. So October 15th through the 30th, I always love because they're starting to seek. They're not like breaking up. You can still get them in a bachelor group, but they'll push each other around a little bit. Things are getting more competitive. They're wandering more, but it's not to the point where they've lost their minds.
Going forward then this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Oklahoma?
I'm going straight back to optimistic, and I think it's a 9, 10. This is what you wait all year for. Our opening weekend was good because we had a little cold front, but this is it. This is when they start going. This is when opportunities will arise if you're in the right spot. I would say put in some extra hours at work, make your wife happy because it's about to get serious. Everything I've seen on the weather, pressures will be good. Moon's supposed to be good. October 20th. It's time to go.
All right, Caleb, I'm excited for you. Good luck with the hunts. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks. Good luck too.
All right, and joining us on the line next is Bo Martonic from Pennsylvania from the East Meets West Hunt podcast. Now, Bo, in Pennsylvania, what would you say the buck activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say that the buck activity has been about a 6, 5 to 6 in the last week. And the reason why I would say that is it was the opening week of deer season, so there hadn't been a ton of pressure yet, and the bucks seemed to be hitting some of those mass crops and seemed to be some deer hitting the ground. From my own personal experience, I didn't have a ton of luck, and still a lot of nighttime activity in some of my locations, but from what I've seen, I'd say give it about a 5 or 6.
As a public land hunter in the big woods, what sort of food sources are you keying in on in mid to late October?
There's a couple different food sources, and mostly I'm going to focus on some of the mass crops. So looking at some of the acorns, whether that be white or red oaks, depending on what are in the area that I'm in. If you can find any apple trees that haven't dropped already, the fact that they've went through a few different frosts seems to almost make them more palatable for the deer. They seem to like those ones a little bit better. And then the early ones, I don't have a good reason for why that is, but it's just my observations. And then in addition to that, cherry trees are dropping black cherries like rain right now, and they're definitely focusing on those. So if you can find an isolated patch where they're dropping, that can be a very good food source. But as we start getting later into October, some of that browse and as the mass crops start to fall and some of it is getting wiped up earlier, looking at some more of the browse features that you'll find in some clear cuts in that 3 to 8 year old range can be really, really good food sources.
When you're doing some in-season scouting on public land, what are you looking for this time of year?
Right now, I'm focusing very heavily on scrapes on the edge of any sort of bedding cover, in which in the big woods, a lot of things can be places to bed, but I'm trying to have the highest priority areas, the areas that look like they're the thicker spots towards the edges of those. If I can find any scrapes on the transition, if there is a food source of some sort of mass crop, within a reasonable distance of that just adds to the whole thing. But trying to figure out, where the potential bedding area is on scrapes as they start to really activate up here in this time of year, and then also what the hot food source is. So those are the things that I'm trying to do as far as in-season scouting.
You mentioned that you're looking for good bedding. What does that look like in big woods?
A couple different things. So depending on the steepness of the terrain, if I'm in an area that has quite a bit of topography, more hill country type stuff, I'm looking for the points of ridges where they'll go around that ridge about 180 degrees, and where they might bed, they're able to use the prevailing wind and the thermal advantage to their advantage, as well as cover. So in some of the spots that may not have as much terrain, looking for some clear cuts or logging cuts that might be anywhere even 3 years or older, but mostly some of those 8 to 15-year-old cuts can be really good bedding for the bucks and does, and mostly they're not going to be bedded on the interior of those, although they can be, but most of the time they're going to be bedded on the edge where they can see out into, say, the open timber or an open field or whatever that might be. So those are the couple things that I'm looking for as far as bedding.
What does a morning setup look like for you this time of year?
So for morning setups, I don't hunt a ton of mornings in early October, but I will depending on the weather. So if we get a cold front like we have coming through here this weekend, then I'm definitely going to be hunting mornings, especially when the temperatures are getting down into the 30s. I'm going to try to hunt scrapes, and I'm trying to hunt these scrapes that are close to bedding. And at this time of year, I'm trying to get in very early in case they're coming back to that bed, right around first light. But I'm hoping that with the cold weather, they might stay up on their feet and feed a little bit later.
Going forward then in this next week or so, what do you think that buck activity is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in Pennsylvania?
I would say that buck activity in the next week or so is going to be possibly even up to an 8 for the weekend. But I'd say for the whole week, it's still not going to get much better as far as around a 5 or a 6. So if you can hit this cold front right, I think some big bucks are going to hit the ground. But other than that, it's supposed to warm right back up again. And I think activity will be a little bit slower at that point.
All right, Bo, I look forward to your videos and podcasts from the East meets West. Good luck and thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Spencer.
And that concludes this week's episode of Rut Fresh Radio. Thanks to Parker, Alex, Caleb, and Bo for joining me, and thank you guys for listening. As always, make sure you're following Wired to Hunt on Facebook and Instagram, following Meat Eater on Facebook and Instagram, and following me at Spencer Newharth on Facebook and Instagram. I hope you're subscribed to our newsletter that goes out every single Monday, built by me and Mark Kenyon, called Whitetail Weekly. In that newsletter, you're going to find all sorts of relevant information from writers like me, Mark, Tony Peterson, Pat Durkin, and more. You can subscribe to the newsletter over on our website, themeateater.com. I hope you're able to beat the October lull and take advantage of the cold front that's hitting most of the country today, tomorrow, and Friday. I'll talk to you guys next week, but until then, stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.